Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This chapter will cover the following learning outcomes. Discuss the need for contingency planning. Describe the major components of incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity. Define the components of crisis management and business resumption. Discuss how the organization would prepare and execute a test of contingency plans, and explain how the organization manages investigations. Section 1, Introduction to Contingency Planning. This section will cover the first learning outcome, discuss the need for contingency planning. Here you see the NIST incident response life cycle. It begins with preparation, then moves to detection and analysis, followed by containment, eradication and recovery, and post-incident activity. We will be referring to this life cycle throughout the presentation. This chapter focuses on the overall planning for unexpected adverse events, also called contingency planning or CP. The main goal of CP is to restore normal modes of operation with minimum cost and disruption to normal business activities after an unexpected adverse event. We look at organizational planning for unexpected adverse events when the use of technology is disrupted and business operations come close to a standstill. Adverse events are going to occur, and InfoSec must plan for them. An organization's ability to weather losses caused by a breach, corruption of data, etc., any unexpected event, depends on proper planning and execution, without which an unexpected event can cause severe damage to an organization's information resources and assets from which it may never recover. To illustrate the need for contingency planning, consider these statistics. 93% of businesses with data center failures for 10 or more days go bankrupt within 1 year. That's a powerful argument for the importance of business continuity planning and disaster recovery. 43% of companies that experience a disruptive event never reopen. Almost half of businesses who have a serious breach or stolen information will never reopen. Think about that. It's important for your organization. Finally, only 6% of businesses without a disaster recovery plan survive in the long term. Those without a plan inevitably experience a disruptive event, and almost all of them go out of business quickly. Clearly, contingency planning is an integral part of an overall organizational business strategy. CP consists of 4 major components: business impact analysis, or BIA, incident response plan, or IR, disaster recovery plan, or DR, business continuity plan, or BC. Depending on the organization's size and business philosophy, IT and InfoSec managers can either 1. Create and develop these 4 CP components as one unified plan, or 2. Create the 4 separately in conjunction with a set of interlocking procedures that enable continuity. Once formed, the Contingency Planning Management Team begins developing a contingency planning document, for which NIST recommends the following steps. 1. Develop the CP policy statement. This is a formal policy that provides the authority and guidance necessary to develop an effective contingency plan. 2. Conduct the business impact analysis. The BIA helps identify and prioritize information systems and components critical to supporting the organization's mission, business processes. A template for creating the BIA is provided by NIST and provides a good starting point. 3. Identify preventive controls. These controls are taken to reduce the effects of system disruptions. They can increase system availability and reduce contingency lifecycle cost. 4. Create contingency strategies. Through recovery strategies, you want to ensure that the system may be recovered quickly and effectively following a disruption. 5. Develop a contingency plan. The contingency plan should contain detailed guidance and procedures for restoring damaged organizational facilities unique to each business unit's impact level. 6. Ensure planned testing, training, and exercises. Testing validates recovery capabilities, whereas training prepares recovery personnel for plan activation, and exercising the plan identifies planning gaps. Combined, the activities improve plan effectiveness and overall organizational preparedness. And 7, ensure plan maintenance. The plan should be a living document that is updated regularly to remain current with system enhancements and organizational changes. Let's look at the components of contingency planning policy. First, you need to include an introductory statement of philosophical perspective, written and/or approved by senior management. You should also include a statement of the scope and purpose of contingency planning operations. The contingency planning management team should insist upon periodic risk assessment and business impact analysis. Another component includes a description of the major components of the contingency plan. How can you summarize it clearly and succinctly in terms that business people will understand? The policy should also call for selection of specific recovery options and business continuity strategies. In addition, the policy should require testing the plans on a regular basis. Key regulations and standards relevant to the organization's situation should be identified. Who is responsible for contingency planning operations? These individuals should be identified by title. Finally, any good contingency plan will ask all individuals for support in conducting recovery from unexpected disruptions. Let's look at the composition of the contingency planning management team, including you need a champion, someone who has power, authority, and commitment to the project. You need a project manager, someone who can deal with the diverse members of the team. You need team members to include business managers, information technology managers, and information security managers. Further, you need teams for incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity. In summary, organizations must plan for unexpected adverse events, and adverse events are going to happen. Count on it. Contingency planning should focus on how to prevent, manage, and recover from disaster. While you need a plan to respond to an incident, you also need to resume business operations as soon as possible to minimize the impact. Without such planning, organizations may be unable to recover from adverse events. Almost half of organizations who don't plan for unexpected events never recover. They go out of business permanently. Every organization does not have the resources and loyal customer base that Sony enjoyed, for instance, during the time when they were hacked by North Korea or other nefarious elements. Most businesses are small, and being down for a few days may mean the end of business forever. Customers don't have to wait. They can do what I do. They can Google it and find a deal elsewhere. We continue Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This is Section 2, the Business Impact Analysis, or BIA. This section will cover the following learning outcome. Describe the major components of incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity. The Business Impact Analysis, BIA, is the first phase of the continuity planning process. One of the fundamental differences between a business impact analysis and risk management is that risk management focuses on identifying the threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks to determine which controls can protect the information. In contrast, the business impact analysis assumes that these controls have been bypassed, have failed, or have otherwise proved ineffective, that the attack has succeeded, and that the adversity that was being defended against has come to fruition. The BIA begins with a prioritized list of threats and vulnerabilities identified in the risk management process and enhances the list by adding the information needed to respond to the adversity. When undertaking the BIA, the organization should consider scope. How much of our information assets are we going to consider? Do we consider everything? Is that practical? Perhaps we can afford to lose some data, but not others. Plan. How will we address the unexpected occurrence? Balance. How do we balance the need for security with the need for access to information assets by our employees and partners? Know the objective. What is the ultimate objective? We want to recover the system, put in new controls, and then put the system back in operation, minimizing disruptions to our internal and external customers as much as possible. Then follow up, how will we determine when the information assets have been recovered and secured? According to NIST SP 834 Revision 1, the Contingency Planning Management Team conducts the BIA in 3 stages. 1. Determine mission, business processes, and recovery criticality. 2. Identify resource requirements. And 3. Identify recovery priorities for system resources. Some recoveries are more important and vital than others. Let's look at each of these stages in more detail on the next few slides. The first major BIA task is the analysis and prioritization of business processes within the organization based on their relationship to the organization's mission. Each business department, unit, or division must be independently evaluated to determine how important its functions are to the organization as a whole. A weighted analysis table may be useful in resolving the issue of what business function is the most critical. One useful tool in identifying and collecting information about business functions for the analysis is the BIA questionnaire. Let's look at some of the terminology so that we understand the detail needed for the business impact analysis. First is maximum tolerable downtime, or MTD. This is the total amount of time the system owner or authorizing official is willing to accept for a mission or business process outage or disruption, and it includes all impact considerations. Next is recovery time objective, or RTO. This is the maximum amount of time that a system resource can remain unavailable before there is an unacceptable impact on other system resources, supported mission business processes, and the MTD, maximum tolerable downtime. Third is recovery point objective, or RPO, which is the point in time prior to a disruption or system outage to which mission business process data can be recovered, given the most recent backup copy of the data after an outage. Finally is work recovery time, or WRT. This is the amount of effort expressed as elapsed time that is necessary to get the business function operational after the technology element is recovered. WRT, or work recovery time, typically involves the addition of non-technical tasks required for the organization to make the particular information asset usable for its intended business function again. Let's look at recovery time objective, RTO, versus recovery point objective, RPO. First, the incident occurs. At that point, it takes you some amount of time to recover and restore the data that is needed for the organization to function properly and securely. That is the recovery time, the time between the incident until systems and data are recovered. Depending on the time that it takes to recover the systems and data, the time may be longer than that specified by the recovery time objective. If it's long enough to negatively impact the performance of the organization, then the RTO was too long. Clearly, you want to minimize the recovery time. After an incident occurs, you may have to go back to a previous version of some or all of the organization's data assets. You want the recovery point to be as close as possible to the time of the incident, which minimizes loss of data between incident occurrence and recovery time. Now let's look at all of the terms together on a timeline. The incident or disaster occurs. The recovery point objective is how far we have to go back to the last backup. We obviously want to minimize RPO so we don't lose data. The recovery time objective defines the amount of time we can wait to recover systems without negatively impacting operations. The maximum tolerable downtime is how long we can handle being down without negative impact. It's typically greater than the RTO, which is our objective or goal. MTD, however, is the maximum amount of time we can handle being down without suffering significant negative impact. Finally, work recovery time is how long it takes us to get up and running. When you add work recovery time to recovery time objective, you have the maximum tolerable downtime. You're down for a while, then you work to recover the data, and that's the maximum tolerable downtime. If you add recovery point objective to maximum tolerable downtime, you have the total time that this incident affected your business. You hope and plan for all of these numbers to be manageable, but you also have to plan for worst case scenario and how you would react. As the length of time of the disruption increases, costs go up markedly. To decrease the disruption time significantly, however, may cost a lot of money in controls and mirroring and backups and people. You have to find the sweet spot and balance cost at the low point on this chart, which is called the cost balance point. It's the lowest cost disruption combination available. You control what you can and keep disruptions to a manageable level without breaking the bank. Once the organization has created a prioritized list of its mission business processes, it needs to determine what resources would be required in order to recover these processes and the assets associated with them. This is stage 2 of the business impact analysis. For each process and information asset identified in the previous business impact analysis stage, the organization should identify and describe the relevant resources needed to provide or support that process. A simplified method for organizing this information is to put it into a resource component table. In summary, business impact analysis uses 3 stages to prioritize threats and develop methods of responding to unexpected incidents. While the goal is to minimize downtime and recover assets as quickly as possible without losing information, cost must be balanced as well. If cost to control exceeds cost to protect assets, then you should reevaluate. With business impact analysis, you prioritize resource allocation based on the criticality of threats to the organization that you consider. We continue Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This is Section 3, Incident Response and Detection. This section will cover the following learning outcomes: describe the major components of incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity, and define the components of crisis management and business resumption. The incident response plan is the documented product of IR planning, a plan that shows the organization's intended efforts in the event of an incident. The responsibility for creating an organization's IR plan usually falls to the CISO or an IT manager with security responsibilities. Incident response is an organization's set of planning and preparation efforts for detecting, reacting, and recovering from an incident. Incident response planning consists of the actions taken by senior management to develop and implement the IR policy, plan, and the computer security incident team. IRP is performed by the IR planning team and begins with IR policy to define the operations of the team, to articulate the organizational response to various types of incident, and to advise end users on how to contribute to the effective response of the organization. A critical task for IRP is the formation of a computer security incident response team, also called CSIRT. This is an incident response team composed of technical IT, managerial IT, and InfoSec professionals who are prepared to detect, react to, and recover from an incident. This team may use predefined responses that guide users through the steps needed to respond to an incident. Predefining incident responses enables rapid reaction without confusion or wasted time and effort. Key members of the incident response and planning team may also be members of this team. In some organizations, the incident response plan is written exclusively by the CIO and/or the CISO, but that isn't true in all organizations. When a threat becomes a valid adverse event, it is classified as an information security incident if it is directed against information assets, it has a realistic chance of success, and it threatens the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information assets. It is important to understand that incident response is a reactive measure, not a preventive or proactive one. For every incident scenario, the contingency planning team creates 3 sets of incident handling procedures. Planners draft a set of procedures to include those tasks that must be performed in advance of the incident. These procedures include detail of data backup schedules, disaster recovery preparation, training schedules, testing plans, copies of service agreements, and business continuity plans. Planners develop and document the procedures that must be performed during the incident as well. These procedures are grouped and assigned to various roles. For this stage, the planning committee drafts a set of function-specific procedures. Finally, once the procedures for handling an incident are drafted, planners develop and document the procedures that must be performed immediately after the incident has ceased. Separate functional areas may develop different procedures. While this chart shows before, during, and after the procedure in chronological order, planners typically develop guidelines in advance in this order. 1, what to do during the incident. 2, what to do after the incident. 3, then that helps them determine what to do before the incident. The incident response plan outlines 3 main actions. First, detection is required as quickly as possible, obviously, to recognize that an incident is underway. Lack of detection can lead to even more severe damage to the organization's information assets. Reaction is responding to the incident in a predetermined manner with all those plans you've developed to contain and mitigate its potential damage. And after detecting and reacting, the organization should return all systems and data to their natural state before the incident during the recovery phase. During an incident, the organization needs to have a plan in place that will cause them to lose as little data as possible. Options for protecting data include traditional data backups. The organization can use a combination of on-site and off-site tape drive or hard drive backup methods and a variety of rotation schemes. Because the backup point is sometime in the past, recent data is potentially lost. Electronic vaulting. The organization employs bulk batch transfer of data to an off-site facility. Transfer is usually conducted via leased lines or secure internet connections. Remote journaling. The organization transfers live transactions to an off-site facility. With remote journaling, only transactions are transferred, not archived data, and the transfer takes place online and is much closer to real time. Finally, database shadowing. Storing duplicate online transaction data along with duplicate databases at the remote site on a redundant server. This option writes multiple copies of the data simultaneously in 2 separate locations. This is the best type of recovery to have and the most expensive. There are numerous indicators or patterns that indicate potential incidents, including, the presence of unfamiliar files, the presence or execution of unknown programs or processes, unusual consumption of computing resources, and unusual system crashes. The contingency plan must have a way to determine when these indicators are present in order to minimize the damage done. While the previous indicators indicated we might have an incident, these activities indicate that we probably have an incident. Activities at unexpected times. While accounting may typically enter accounts payable during normal working hours, all of a sudden they are adding foreign accounts payable at odd hours. Presence of new accounts. New vendors pop up unexpectedly and in larger numbers than expected. Reported attacks. CERT or other groups report new attacks or is reported online. Notification from your own intrusion detection and prevention systems. Your own system controls notify you that an intrusion was attempted and maybe was successful. If any of these activities occur, you need to have plans in place to investigate and respond quickly. Some activities definitely indicate an incident is occurring and you need to respond immediately. Use of dormant accounts, accounts that have not been used and sometimes suddenly become active. Changes to logs, audit logs that seldom have data reported suddenly show large amounts of data. Presence of hacker tools, indication of hacking attempts, password sniffers, backdoors, Trojan horses, malware, or other methods of attack may indicate serious problems. Notifications by partner or peer. Sometimes a partner or even a competitor will notify you of a potential problem. This is similar to the credit card company calling you if you make unusual purchases in unusual locations. Notification by hacker. Sometimes a white hat hacker will let you know about a hole or a vulnerability that you need to patch, or even a vulnerability that has been exploited. These white hat hackers research vulnerabilities and inform you when they occur. In all of these cases, you need to put the incident response plan in place and work to quickly resolve the issue. Sometimes you are notified when the actual incident has occurred. Examples include loss of availability, you're unable to log into the system or access administrative privileges. Loss of integrity, your data does not match across databases or changes are inaccurate, compromising billing and even patient care if names or medications are entered incorrectly and intentionally. Loss of confidentiality, top-level executive salaries are made available to all employees, reducing morale. Violation of policy, encrypted data is no longer encrypted, or files are allowed to be transferred off-site that aren't supposed to be allowed to do so. Violation of the law, federally protected information assets are posted on a website, or in the case of Sony, yet to be released full-length movies are posted online. Any of these activities should be handled expeditiously. You are looking at potential lawsuits and fines, and the longer you have a compromised system, the larger the fines may be. In summary, an incident response plan is implemented to deal with before, during, and after a security incident. The CISO, or a top IT manager, is usually charged with implementing the incident response plan. There are multiple methods of protecting data. Organizations should choose the method that balances cost with risks. And methods must be put into place to recognize potential, probable, and likely security incidents in an effort to respond quickly and minimize damage. We continue with Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This is Section 4, Incident Response, CSIRT Actions, Escalation, and Recovery. This section will cover the following learning outcomes. Describe the major components of incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity, and define the components of crisis management and business resumption. Remember the last section talked about recognizing incidents? Once an actual incident has been confirmed and properly classified, the IR plan moves from the detection phase to the reaction phase. In the incident response phase, a number of action steps taken by the team and others must occur quickly and may occur concurrently. These steps include notification of key personnel, the assignment of tasks, and documentation of the incident. First is clear and unambiguous notification of key personnel. As soon as an incident is declared, the right people must be immediately notified in the right order. An alert roster may be used, which is a document containing contact information and sequential and/or hierarchical notification order. The alert message is a scripted description of the incident. Other key personnel must also be notified of the incident only after the incident has been confirmed, but before media or other external sources learn of it. The second step is assignment of task, including to whom, what position the task should be assigned, when, and in what manner or how. Finally, is documentation of the incident. As soon as an incident has been confirmed and the notification process is underway, the team should begin documentation of the incident. It should record the who, what, when, where, why, and how of each action taken while the incident is occurring. Documentation serves as a case study after the fact to determine if the right actions were taken and if they were effective. It can also prove the organization did everything possible to deter the spread of the incident. This might help in legal cases in the future and may limit damages. The essential task of incident response is to stop the incident and contain its impact. Incident containment strategies focus on stopping the incident and recovering control of the systems. Strategies include disabling compromised user accounts, take away the privileges of those accounts, close them, quarantine them, contain them, but disable them. Reconfiguring a firewall to block the problem traffic, adjusting controls to meet threats is necessary. Temporarily disabling the compromised process or service, remove it from the system. If receiving is compromised, stop receiving shipments of medication. Take down the application or server, for example, the email system if that's the problem. Stop all computers and network devices. In extreme cases where the company has little control over anything, all computers and network devices may have to be stopped, and you may have to be relocated to off-site, uncontaminated locations until recovery is in place. Taking down the conduit application or server, for example, the email server. Stopping all computers and network devices in the most extreme case, again, like the Sony incident, they had to stop everything for a little while. Let's look at incident escalation and recovery. An incident may increase in scope or severity to the point that the incident response plan cannot adequately contain the incident. Each organization will have to determine during the business impact analysis the point at which the incident becomes a disaster. The organization must also document when do we get outside people involved. Recovery from incidents happens after the incident is contained and control is regained, which is when incident recovery can begin. The team must assess the full extent of the damage in order to determine what must be done to restore the system. The immediate determination of the scope of the breach of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information and information assets is called incident damage assessment. Those who document the damage must be trained to collect and preserve incident evidence in case the incident is part of a crime or results in a legal action. Incident recovery includes several components. Part of incident recovery is identifying the vulnerabilities that allowed the incident to occur in the first place and spread, and then control the vulnerabilities. You must address the safeguards that failed to stop or limit the incident or were completely missing from the system in the first place, and then install, replace, or upgrade them. You should evaluate your monitoring capabilities, if present, to improve detection and reporting methods, or install new capabilities if needed. Restore the data from backups as needed. Restore the services and processes then used. Where compromised and interrupted services and processes must be examined, cleaned, and then restored. Continuously monitor the system. You have to keep monitoring even during an incident. Finally, restore the confidence of the members of the organization. Your organization will not get back up and running until users believe the data, systems, and processes are safe and reliable. Teams that are gathered to handle responding to an incident response make multiple mistakes, according to McAfee. They fail to appoint a clear chain of command with a specified individual in charge. For incident recovery, the plan is usually implemented by the CISO or top IT manager. Establish a central operations center, one where the right people are there and are working to resolve the incident. Know your enemy, as we talked about in chapters 1 and 6. Develop a comprehensive incident response plan with containment strategies. These are essential to an effective response plan. Record information response activities at all phases, especially help desk tickets to detect incidents. We know the importance of documenting all activities for future references and for record of all responses during the incident. Document the events as they occur in a timeline, so afterward you can debrief and determine what you could do better. Distinguish incident containment from incident remediation as part of reaction. When you contain an incident, you found the source of the problem. After containing it, you can work to remediate the problem. Secure and monitor networks and network devices. A good InfoSec professional should never overlook this item. This must occur during an attack. Establish and manage system and network logging. If something happens, you want to have a log that helps you track down who or what IP address or what device triggered a change. Finally, it should go without saying, but it is necessary to establish and support effective antivirus and anti-malware solutions. Avoiding these mistakes leads to better chances of implementing successful incident response plans. NIST makes recommendations for incident handling before it occurs, and it includes: acquire tools and resources that may be of value during incident handling. Prevent incidents from occurring by ensuring that network systems and applications are sufficiently secure. Identify precursors and indicators through alerts generated by several types of security software. Establish mechanisms for outside parties to report incidents. You want people to tell you when they notice something. Establish strategies and procedures for containing incidents. Require a baseline level of logging and auditing on all systems and a higher baseline level on all critical systems. Profile networks and systems. Understand the normal behaviors of networks, systems, and applications. Create a log retention policy. Perform event correlation. What similar activities are you seeing when an event occurs? Keep all host clocks synchronized so there is no doubt of when something occurred and when an activity was accessed, and maintain and use a knowledge base of information, much of which is often contained and retained by the help desk. NIST makes recommendations for incident handling during and after an incident as well. Here they say you should follow provisions for incident reporting from the organization's incident response policy. You developed it, let's use it. Start recording all information as soon as you suspect an incident has occurred. Immediately start documenting. Prioritize handling of incidents. Everything is not equal. Look at how you ranked it based on relevant factors. Follow established procedures for evidence gathering and handling. You've got it in your plan, use it. Capture volatile data from systems as evidence. Don't allow someone to erase a log or to get rid of their history. Safeguard the incident data, protect it, make sure that it is not capable of being attacked. Obtain system snapshots through a full forensic disk image, not a file system backup, but an image of the disk, what exactly is there. And at the end, hold lessons learned after major incidents. After any major incidents, hold lessons learned and talk about it. To summarize this section, when a threat is detected, InfoSec professionals should notify appropriate people, make assignments, and document all steps. The essential task of incident response is to stop incidents and contain impact. Incident containment strategies focus on stopping the incident and recovering control of the system. Part of incident recovery includes keeping a record of events that happened during the incident, for history, for reflection and learning, and to mitigate legal charges. All incidents are not equally important. It's important to prioritize tasks, technology, systems, and portable devices, even among a group of highly important systems, information assets, etc. We continue Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This is Section 5, Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity. This section will focus on the following learning outcomes: describe the major components of incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity, define the components of crisis management and business resumption. Disaster recovery planning, or DRP, entails preparation for and recovery from a disaster, whether it's natural or man-made. In general, an incident is a disaster when the organization is unable to control or contain the impact of the incident, or the level of damage or destruction from an incident is so severe the organization is unable to quickly recover. The key role of a disaster recovery plan is defining how to reestablish operations at the location where the organization is usually located, its primary site. The NIST methodology can be adapted for disaster recovery planning. Here, you organize the team, develop the disaster recovering policy statement, review the business impact analysis, identify preventive controls, create disaster recovery strategies, develop the disaster recovery plan document, ensure disaster recovery plan testing, training, and exercises, and ensure disaster recovery plan maintenance. The Contingency Planning Team creates the Disaster Recovery Planning Team, DRPT, which organizes and prepares the disaster recovery response teams that then implement the disaster recovery plan. These teams may have multiple responsibilities in the recovery of the primary site and the reestablishment of operations, recover information assets that are salvageable from the primary facility after the disaster, purchase or otherwise acquire replacement information assets from appropriate sources, reestablish functional information assets at the primary site if possible, or at a new primary site if necessary. Disaster recovery response teams who may participate in the disaster recovery activities include disaster recovery management, managers with responsibility for the disaster management plan. Communications, public relations, and communications teams who manage the crisis and serve as a public face. Computer recovery hardware team, teams with expertise in hardware and who replace, repair, or scrap hardware that was affected. Systems recovery OS, responsible for recovery of the operating system. Network recovery team, responsible for recovery of network access. Storage recovery, responsible for recovering stored data, particularly personally identifiable information which may be protected by law. Applications recovery, Word, Access, SAP, any other applications used by the organizations. Data management, databases and data storage to include cloud computing. Vendor contact, representatives from various companies who may assist as you overcome the disaster and who as external customers need to be informed about what's going on. Damagement assessment and salvage, determine if damaged equipment can be salvaged or should be destroyed or donated. Logistics, getting everything to the right people at the right time in priority order and anybody else that is needed. There's a lot to do. It needs to be properly planned. The disaster recovery team, led by the manager designated as the DR team leader, begins with the development of the disaster recovery policy soon after the team is formed. The policy presents an overview of the organization's philosophy on the conduct of disaster recovery operations and serves as the guide for the development of the disaster recovery plan. The disaster recovery policy itself may have been created by the organization's CISO or IT manager. In either case, the disaster recovery policy contains the following key elements: purpose, scope, roles and responsibilities, resource requirements, training requirements, exercise and testing schedules, plan maintenance schedule, and special considerations. You see there's a lot of overlap between each of these plans. A disaster recovery plan can classify disasters in a number of ways. Natural disasters, something beyond the control of the organization, an act of God. Or man-made disasters, someone hacks into the system or an employee makes a mistake or control fails. Disaster recovery plans can also be classified by speed of development. Rapid onset disasters, quickly changing environment with little time to respond with effective countermeasures, or slow onset disasters. Group gets into your system and sits for a while, learning as they go. It may take a while, but the damage from this type of attack may be as costly as other types, or even more so. When generating a disaster recovery scenario and planning to recover, start with the most important asset: people. Scenario development and impact analysis are used to categorize the level of threat of each potential disaster. Key points in the disaster recovery plan: clear delegation of roles and responsibility. Who does what and when and how? Execution of the alert roster and notification of key personnel, who is notified first and second, and so forth. Clear establishment of priorities. Even though many priorities are critical, you have to prioritize, as we've said before. Documentation of the disaster. Keep a record for the future, starting at the beginning of the disaster and continuing on till the end. Action steps that will be taken to mitigate the impact. What steps do we plan to take, and did we take, to minimize the impact? And finally, alternative implementations for the various system components. Are there other ways we can implement the systems if some of the methods of implementation are contaminated or damaged due to disaster? We know about disasters and how to respond to them. Let's now move to disasters that have such a profound impact on the organization that it cannot continue operations at its primary site until it fully completes all disaster recovery efforts, which requires a business continuity strategy. Business continuity planning ensures critical business functions can continue to function in a disaster, most likely managed by the CEO or COO. A business continuity plan is activated and executed concurrently with the disaster recovery plan when needed. While disaster recovery planning focuses on recovery at the primary site, business continuity planning temporarily establishes critical functions at an alternate site. The NIST methodology can also be adapted to business continuity planning. Steps include: form the business continuity plan, usually selected from a diverse group of people with knowledge of the business and talents needed to support business continuity. Develop the business continuity policy statement. What's the purpose of the team? Review the business impact analysis. What areas do we need to analyze to ensure business continuity? Identify preventive controls. What do we have in place already to support business continuity? Create relocation strategies. Where is an alternate site that we can use quickly and securely and on short notice? Develop the business continuity plan. Be specific. What will you do at the alternate site? Test the business continuity plan, training people on it, and do regular exercises to practice and refine. And finally, maintain, improve, review, and refine the business continuity plan. Let's look at an example. A disaster occurs. The disaster recovery plan is implemented. Meanwhile, business continuity moves the essential, previously identified applications to an alternate site. At the same time, disaster recovery works to reestablish operations at the primary location. Until then, only essential operations may be available, and perhaps none at the primary site. In fact, if you think back to 9/11, when the World Trade Center collapsed, many organizations lost their primary location entirely, and in some it was never reestablished. Fortunately, that kind of huge impact disaster is rare, but it must be anticipated. Those companies who were able to shift operations to another location were able to recover more quickly than those that could not. There are several strategies for business continuity, and the determining factor is, as you may guess, cost. Exclusive use options include hot sites, warm sites, and cold sites. With these opportunities, you own the area or lease it by yourself. With shared use options, you share it with someone else. You may share, much like you do a condominium timeshare, or you may have agreements with partners or with suppliers or others so it's a little bit less expensive. And finally, specialized. Maybe you have a rolling mobile site with bare bones operations and it rotates among central and important locations, or you may simply store data resources in another site, pre-positioning them in case of disaster, and then you have to go and get that site up and running. Which option is better? It depends. Like so many questions in this class, you have to evaluate the level of risk you're willing to tolerate and how much you're willing to pay to reduce the risk. It may also depend on legal and service level obligations that your organization must follow. To summarize, we know that companies need to have a plan on how they will respond to unexpected situations. Let's now look at incidents, disasters, and business continuity all together. First, an incident is detected. If the incident isn't a disaster, then you react and resolve it, completely recovering. If the incident is, however, labeled as a disaster, then the disaster recovery plan kicks in, and the disaster recovery team works to restore operations at the primary site. If the disaster requires off-site operations, then the business continuity team reacts and an alternate site is used for critical operations, as previously discussed. While the alternate site is running, the disaster recovery team is working to store operations at the primary location, at which time normal operations can resume. This graphic does a good job of illustrating the different types of responses that may occur at an organization when unexpected adverse events occur. We continue Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This is Section 6, Crisis Management, Business Resumption, and Plan Maintenance. This section will cover the following learning outcomes: define the components of crisis management and business resumption, Discuss how the organization would prepare and execute a test of contingency plans. Another process that many operations plan for separately is crisis management, CM, which focuses more on the effects that a disaster has on people than its effect on information assets. Remember the most important assets we discussed previously? Your people. While some organizations include crisis management as a subset of the disaster recovery plan, the protection of human life and the organization's image is such a high priority that it may deserve its own committee, policy, and plan. This is particularly important to healthcare organizations. Think back again to the New Orleans hospital with no power during Katrina for several days. According to Gartner Research, the crisis management team is responsible for managing the event from an enterprise perspective and performs the following roles: supporting personnel and their loved ones during the crisis, keeping the public informed about the event and the actions being taken to ensure the recovery of personnel and the enterprise, and communicating with major customers, suppliers, partners, regulatory agencies, industry organizations, the media, and other interested parties. Let's look back at our timeline of activities. Recall that when an incident is escalated to disaster or starts as a disaster, then the disaster recovery plan kicks in. If the disaster recovery team cannot handle it, then business continuity takes effect. If the disaster threatens injury or loss of life to personnel, crisis management response is activated. Once all personnel are safe and/or accounted for, the crisis management plan ends, although business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning may continue for some time afterwards. The crisis management team, planning team, CMPT, should establish a base of operations or command center near the site of the disaster as soon as possible. The crisis management planning team should include individuals from all functional areas of the organization in order to facilitate communications and cooperation. The crisis management team is charged with these primary responsibilities: activating the alert roster, verifying personnel status, coordinating with emergency services, and handling all communications. Since disaster recovery and business continuity plans are closely related, most organizations merge the two functions into a single function called Business Resumption Planning, or BRP. Business resumption planning requires reestablishment of operations at two different locations, one immediately at an alternate site and one eventually back at the primary site, unless that's not possible. Very few plans are actually executable as initially written. Instead, they must be tested to identify vulnerabilities, faults, and inefficient processes. There are 4 training and testing strategies that can be used to train, test, and maintain contingency plans, including desk check. With a desk check, a knowledgeable professional reviews and provides feedback on the plan. This is the least invasive and the least effective method of testing and training on contingency plans. Structured walkthrough. This method allows employees to walk through and simulate potential unexpected occurrences. Think of testing the fire drill at an office building as a structured walkthrough. This is the least expensive training method, particularly if the test occurred during times that won't greatly affect operations. Simulation or training exercise, or you may be given a scenario. The email system has been compromised. Now what do you do and how do you react? A cyber defense training program provides simulations on multiple activities that might arise and is an example of a simulation that might occur in one company. This is a medium-level expense, but allows people to practice in an environment that is close to what might be expected. Two examples of training exercises that you may have heard of. The Chernobyl nuclear facility was undergoing a training exercise at the time it began to greatly overheat. By the time it was determined, it was too late, and we're still experiencing health fallouts 30 years later. Another example was when 9/11 occurred, and the FAA asked the military for help after closing all airline traffic coming into the U.S. or arriving from outside the U.S. When the FAA called the Air Force, their question was, is this real world or exercise? Sometimes a real-world incident will overlap with a simulated incident, which could delay your response. And finally, full interruption. You could simulate a full interruption and see how the employees respond. However, you might want to do a full interruption of all but the most critical systems, and at a time where customers are unlikely to experience disruption. This is the most costly, but the best way to prepare the key individuals for their roles when an unexpected event occurs. A few final thoughts on contingency planning. Iteration results in improvement. Practice makes perfect. A formal implementation of this methodology is a process known as continuous process improvement, CPI, getting better over time. Each time the plan is rehearsed, it should be improved. If not, rethink the rehearsal and/or the plan. Constant evaluation and improvement leads to improved outcome, which is the desire of the organization and everyone, while limiting cost, of course. To summarize, crisis management plans consider the potential loss of life and organizational reputation, staying in touch with family members and others to keep them updated. Since disaster recovery and business continuity planning are so similar, they're often merged together to form a business resumption plan, BRP. Testing and training must be performed so that contingency planning improves over time, no matter the level or type of incident. We finished Chapter 10, Planning for Contingencies. This is Section 7, Managing Investigations. The final learning outcome is discussed in this section. Explain how the organization manages investigations. When, not if, an organization finds itself having to deal with a suspected policy or law violation, they must appoint an individual to investigate it, or a team. How the internal investigation proceeds will dictate whether or not the organization has the ability to take action against the perpetrator, if in fact evidence is found that substantiates the charge. In order to protect the organization and to possibly assist law enforcement in the conduct of an investigation, the investigator, or CISO, InfoSec manager, or other appointed individual or individuals, must act to document what happened and how. Forensics, it's not like you see on CSI. Forensic is the coherent application of methods of investigatory techniques to present evidence of crimes in a court or court-like setting. In contrast, digital forensic involves the preservation, identification, extraction, documentation, and interpretation of digital media for evidentiary and/or root cause analysis. Like traditional forensics, digital forensics follows clear, well-defined methodologies, but still tends to be as much art as science. Evidentiary material, EM, also known as an item of potential evidentiary value, is any information that could potentially support the organization's legal or policy-based case against a suspect or suspects. An item does not become evidence until it is formally admitted to evidence by a judge or other ruling official. Digital forensics can be used for two key purposes. One, to investigate allegations of digital malfeasance, a crime against or using digital media, computer technology, or related components without proper authorization is referred to as digital malfeasance. Two, to perform root cause analysis. If an incident occurs and the organization suspects an attack was successful, digital forensics can be used to examine the path and methodology used to gain unauthorized access, as well as to determine how pervasive and successful the attack was. This will help develop better controls and be better prepared for future attacks. Many investigations begin with an allegation or an indication of an incident. In law enforcement, the investigating agent would create an affidavit requesting a search warrant. Then, when an approving authority signs the affidavit or creates a synopsis form based on this document, it becomes a search warrant and grants permission to search for items of evidentiary value at the specified location and/or to seize items to return to the investigator's lab for examination. In corporate environments, however, the names of these documents may change and in many cases may be verbal in nature, but the process should be the same. Formal permission is obtained before an investigation occurs. Let's take a look at the digital forensics process. A security incident triggers an incident response process. Evidence is collected and analyzed, and a report is produced. If a policy violation or crime is detected, you prepare an affidavit seeking permission to investigate, and upon authorization, you collect and analyze evidence, produce a report, and submit to the appropriate authority, internal or external, for handling. At the end of the cycle, you archive the report. In digital forensics, all investigations follow the same basic methodology. Identify relevant items of evidentiary value or evidentiary material. Acquire or seize the evidence without alteration or damage. Take steps to ensure that the evidence is at every step verifiably authentic and is unchanged from the time it was seized. Analyze the data without risking modification or unauthorized access, and report the findings to the proper authority. Oftentimes on shows on TV that do this, they will go into a suspect's location or home, see the computer and try to log in. You should never do that. You preserve the original, you clone it, and then you look and investigate from the clone, not the original. Organizations should develop specific digital forensics procedures along with guidance on the use of these procedures. EM policy should specify who may conduct an investigation. It likely should be a well-trained, diverse in terms of skills, and authorized team selected by the CISO or CIO or other delegate. Who may authorize an investigation? It could be any C-level executive or the CISO or CIO. What affidavit-related documents are required? This will vary depending on the allegations and evidence needed. What search warrant-related documents are required? If the law is required or if your organization has policies on searches, you will need to acquire these documents. If not, you may be able to acquire them with no search warrant. What digital media may be seized or taken offline. Some digital evidence may be necessary for proper running of the system. The InfoSec authorizing agent must ensure that removal of digital evidence must be done responsibly. Many times, it's best to clone the PC, as I mentioned, or digital device, and then work on it offline. In a court of law, that's the best way, since the original is locked up and not changed, and the defense can request to see it if there are questions. What methodology should be followed? This should be based on legal guidelines, laws, and regulations, or policies and rules for the organization. What methods are required for chain of custody or chain of evidence? Again, these should be specified on legal guidelines, laws and regulations, and/or policies and rules for the organization. And finally, what format should the final report take, and to whom should it be given? Whatever format makes the most sense, choose it. Give yourself some flexibility because different evidence may be better viewed and understood in different formats. And specify to whom the document should be released. Local law enforcement, the FBI, Interpol, your CIO, CISO, or CEO, or one of their designees. Going into this level of detail will make the evidence collection process easier and will make it more legally binding. When an incident violates civil or criminal law, it is the organization's responsibility to notify the proper authorities. Selecting the appropriate law enforcement agency depends on the type of crime committed, federal, state, or local. Involving law enforcement has both advantages and disadvantages. They are usually much better equipped at processing evidence, obtaining statements from witnesses, and building legal cases. However, involvement can result in loss of control of the chain of events following an incident at your organization. In summary, organizations must be able to investigate when they believe organizational policy, laws, rules, or regulations have been violated. Digital forensics is a relatively new field where an appointed person investigates the individual's digital footprint to perform root cause analysis or to determine if digital malfeasance has occurred. Investigators must be able to seize all documents without destroying the original. Cloning a PC and then analyzing the clone, for instance, is a better option. And finally, organizations may choose to, or may have to, involve law enforcement at the local, state, and/or federal levels. Drawbacks are loss of control, while advantages are their vast experience in investigations.